Hello, 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 and welcome to Friendship Empire. I'm the Empress, and on today's episode, we are discussing the scandals of the Iranian Imperial Family. And with Iran in the news a lot lately, and talk of regime change once again, which I guess has been going on probably since the fall of the Shah back in 1979, I decided to take a little look into the Iranian Imperial Family, the Pahlavi dynasty. And, I was thinking when I was hearing about what was going on between in that region. I again don't want to get too political. It is this Friendship Empire is a no politics zone, but we do enjoy history, and we certainly enjoy the more salacious aspects of history. And so when Iran came up in the news again recently, and right now it is the 10th of July 2025 as I am speaking, I was thinking, I wonder if they would like to bring the Pahlavis back to the throne, because I know that they've been kicking around in the intervening decades. And I took a look, and sure enough, I found this article from Politico, I believe, yes, dated June 24th, 2025. And this is an article not about the last Shah of Iran, but about his son, the Crown Prince, if you want to call him that, and some do. As you can see, if you have eyes on screen, the title of the article is "The Man Who Might Benefit from Regime Change in Iran. The son of the former Shah has been calling for the ouster of the country's religious rulers for decades." Yes, what was going on in Iran has given him hope it might happen. Now, we're not going to read this article today, but we are going to read a 1988 Vanity Fair article about the Crown Prince's father, who is the man in the two photographs on your screen to the right, on the upper right-hand corner here. That is the last Shah of Iran, Mohammed Reza Pahlavi, with his wife, who she is still with us. The Shah is no longer with us. His wife, Farah Diba Pahlavi, also called the Empress of Iran, they are also in the bottom picture with their crowns on in front of what is called the Peacock throne of Iran, and that would be their son, the Crown Prince, when he was just a little boy. He is obviously much older now, it being, about 40 years after, I guess, or 50, depending on when this, I'm not exactly sure when this photo was taken, but let's say it's definitely decades. And you can see the Crown Prince, who is also called, he's just Reza, much like, if I remember correctly, that was his grandfather's name. And you can see this poster from it says a protest in The Hague, the Netherlands. This is the Crown Prince here on the right, and then that's his father, the last Shah, this guy, in the middle, and then the grandfather of the Crown Prince, the father of the Shah, on the left. And that comprises the entire modern imperial dynasty of Iran. The founder of the dynasty, the grandfather, the next guy, and then the next guy was the Shah, the final Shah, and then we have the Crown Prince, who the man who would be the third Shah, but there is no throne. Well, the throne exists, but it is not there for him to sit on. But hope springs eternal in pretty much all people, especially deposed royals. And I found it amusing that I found this article as well from The Economist. And there you go. That's the Crown Prince now. You can see the passage of time, a tiny little boy with his parents here, and now an older man. And this is not a recent article, but this is from 2023. So this is definitely, something that has been kicking around, an idea that has been kicking around for a long time, regardless of, the political or the, whatever's going on. This has been decades. A lot of things have happened in that area over the decades, but his hope of returning to Iran and its throne, it's sort of a dusty, semi-defunct throne, I guess. The throne is there, but there's no kingdom. There's no empire. But there it is. This is from 2023. The son of Iran's last Shah bids to regain the throne, and that was 2 years ago. So yes, this is obviously an ongoing story. There has been no restoration to the throne as of yet. But as the topic came up and I was looking at articles about the Crown Prince, I was reminded of the many, many tragedies that have occurred, personal tragedies. Obviously, there's the whole issue of the family being ousted from the country, their father off of the throne, or the Crown Prince's father. The Crown Prince has had 3 siblings. They are not all with us any longer, and that is part of the family tragedies of the Pahlavis. But in addition to some of the unfortunate tragedies, there has also been some scandalous behavior. And if you could tell from the title of today's episode, part 1, Spies, and I'm going to say spiciness, and the fall of the last Shah of Iran. There was a lot of non-political juice to talk about, and so we're going back in time, back to 1988, and this is an article from Vanity Fair, and it does cover inevitably a lot of politics. This is politics from a long time ago, so nothing to get worked up over now, I hope. Not for me, anyway. And there is going to be some medical discussions, especially at the latter part of the article. So if you're a bit squeamish, it's not going to get too in depth, and I'm not going to dwell on that discussion, but it is inevitable. And there is going to be some talk about spiciness, some spicy topics. It being Vanity Fair, it's not going to be too, the language isn't going to be too bad, but there are some words that for YouTube community guidelines and to keep the show general audience and family friendly, I'm going to use some euphemisms, clean it up a little bit. I think we'll all understand what I'm saying, and I apologize for not being able to speak as a full adult, but this is, just trying to keep things clean. The topic will be, racy enough without having to use the racy language. But if you really, really, really need to know exactly what I'm avoiding saying, you can put your eyes on the screen and you will be able to see the text. So without further ado, let's take a look. And this is what the inside the magazine itself, this photograph, that is the Shah, as you could probably guess, sitting in the chair. And this says, The Last Days of the Shah, and it is from August 1988. The final decadent excesses of the Peacock throne masked a somber secret. The Shah of Iran was mortally ill with cancer. His flight to political asylum became a search for medical expertise, but ironically, the rich and powerful can often get the worst treatment. In an excerpt from his new book, The Shah's Last Ride, William Shawcross chronicles the family dramas and the medical tragedies of a dying dynasty. And this honestly only begins to scrape the surface because it was published in 1988. A bunch of things happened after the fact, after 1988, that are not covered in this article. And again, this is merely part 1. We will be covering the post-1988 scandals and tragedies of the Iranian Imperial Family in future episodes. Continuing. Late one February afternoon in 1980, Ambler Moss, then the American ambassador to Panama, hit the panic button. A call had come through from Robert Armau, the principal Western attendant to the exiled and ailing Shah of Iran, who was, at that moment, in his last sad odyssey, a guest of the Panamanians. Armau sounded unhappy. "I want to alert you to something very serious," he said. "They've taken away the Shah. I think he has been kidnapped." "Oh God, here we go," thought Moss. For some weeks, there had been rumors that Omar Torrijos, the charismatic macho general who had run Panama for the better part of a decade, was about to extradite Mohammed Reza Pahlavi, King of Kings, Light of the Aryans. Yeah, we'll skip over that term without having to go into discussion about what they mean. Not the way that it sometimes means in other places. Continuing. It was said that the Shah was to be handed over to Ayatollah Khomeini in return for the release of the American hostages, then in their third month of captivity at the besieged embassy in Tehran. The Shah was nervous. Some of his people were very nervous, and Armau seemed to Moss to be just about hysterical. It was not only Armau, there were others in the Republican Party, in the State Department, and even in the White House, who were intensely suspicious of Torrijos. No way could he be relied upon. He was a drunk, a coke addict, not the soda, probably also a communist. After all, he was a friend of Castro. Even President Carter's national security advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, was worried that Torrijos might be fooled into handing over the Shah against the promise of the hostages' release. Ambler Moss had no such fears, or at least not many. He thought he knew Torrijos pretty well. He was absolutely certain he could be trusted, or, at any rate, he would have been certain if others had not been so paranoid and had not seized on every opportunity to instill doubts. Nervousness is infectious. When Armau told him the Shah had been taken off alone, he felt his legs go weak. "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to sound calm. You know he was scheduled to go over tomorrow morning to look at some real estate," said Armau. "Yes," said Moss. "Well, Colonel Noriega's people just came along and said that he'd have to spend the night in Panama City and start from there first thing in the morning." "Really?" said Moss. "Yeah, that's what they told him, and so they took him away," said Armau. Moss began to mop his brow. The Panamanians had been keen to persuade the Shah to invest in the country. Indeed, Armau felt that one of the principal reasons that Torrijos had invited the Shah to Panama was to get his hands on the Pahlavi fortune. Several of Torrijos' girlfriends had come over to the house the Shah was staying in on Contadora Island, offering real estate on the mainland. The Shah and the Queen, Faradiba, went to look at some of the properties. Members of the Panamanian bourgeoisie would show them around their marble halls in the suburbs or on the mountain slopes, while the Queen made polite comments and the Shah peered over his spectacles, saying nothing. But there was an obvious problem. The Shah and the Queen would need a fully furnished house. Not many Panamanian millionaires actually wanted to move out and dispose of their furniture, their linen, their silver, their china, their glass, their pictures, everything, unless it was really made worth their while. If the Shah had come along and offered $5 million for an $800,000 house, that might have been worth some inconvenience. It would finance a trip to Tiffany's. But the Shah never made an offer that a right-thinking, rich Panamanian could not refuse. Moss knew that since the Shah was living only a few minutes from the Contadora airstrip, and the flight to the mainland took only a few minutes more, the idea that he had to leave the previous night for an early appointment made no sense at all. Armau knew it too. That's why he was alarmed. Armau said he had tried as hard as he could to get on the aircraft with the Shah, but the National Guard had refused absolutely to let him. He had never trusted the Panamanians, and now he was convinced they were harming the Shah. He told Moss, I'm going to call Joe Reed, an assistant to David Rockefeller, who with Henry Kissinger was the Shah's loyal supporter during his exile. And he'll call Kissinger, and they'll alert the press and call the White House. We're going to raise hell." "Wait," said Moss. "Don't do anything yet. I'll try to find out what's happening." He put down the receiver in a state of some distress. Could they really have kidnapped the Shah? Was he already in a box, being loaded by a forklift truck into a transport plane, or being wheeled heavily bandaged and substanced across the tarmac like a Soviet embassy official whose plan to defect has gone hideously wrong and who finds himself in the care of KGB nurses? Could Torrijos really have made some sort of deal with Khomeini? It was impossible. What about Noriega, who was in charge of the Shah's security? He was far more unscrupulous than Torrijos. Might he have cut his own deal with Tehran? The possibility was too horrendous. Moss started to call around the city to try to discover what was happening. He spent an hour and a half on the telephone. Complete blank. Torrijos was unavailable. With a woman, probably. Noriega could not be found. No one else knew anything. Should I call Washington? Moss wondered. It was tempting, but it would be insane. He knew that if he was in a panic, State would have a coronary. My God, would they send the Marines? There'd be B-52s over Panama City within hours. Finally, at about 8:30 in the evening, Moss reached the last person he expected to know anything. Aristides Royo, the president and putative head of the country. Royo was at home. "Where is the Shah?" asked the ambassador. Usually, they spoke together in Spanish, but this time, the president replied in English. Odd, thought Moss. "Ambler, don't worry about it," said Royo. "We've got everything under control." "What do you mean? I must know what's happening," said Moss. The president replied, "I'm speaking English because I'm sitting here watching television with my wife." Moss waited. "Isn't a man entitled to a good time?" asked the president of Panama. "What do you mean?" asked the ambassador of the United States. "You know what I mean. Everyone likes to have a little fun now and then." Moss was not really in the mood. "By God, I don't get it," he said. President Royo was a little impatient. "Oh, don't be naive," he said. "I'm talking about a woman." Moss almost fell off his chair. "What, the Shah?" he cried. "Yes." "Oh, Jesus, Aristides. Thank God," said Moss, as relieved as he was astonished. He called back Armao on Contadora and said, "Look, Bob, I can't talk because this is an open line, but I know that the Shah is all right. I can assure you, as ambassador. Please don't call anybody. There's no problem whatsoever, and I'm sure that His Majesty will explain it all to you when he gets back to the island." Noriega later said that he had indeed been responsible for this night on the town. He claimed that in one of their conversations on the terrace at Contadora, the Shah had made it clear how bored he was becoming on the island. Noriega began to explain the macho ethic of Latin America. Every man in Panama had a mistress as well as a wife. Oh dear. The Shah responded favorably to this concept and said he would like to see a little more of Panamanian life. So, the National Guard had booked a suite at the Panama Hotel, the city's largest establishment, and arranged for a young woman to come to dinner. She was not a hoe. Noriega insisted, but someone of good family. I'm sure. Nice girl, nice family. When they had pried the Shah away from Armao, they took him straight to the hotel. He had dinner with his guards and the woman, and then retired for the night. The incident appears somewhat differently in the final version of the Shah's last memoirs, which were rewritten a few months later as he lay dying in Egypt. Speaking of Panamanian attempts to isolate him, he wrote, "On one occasion, I flew to Panama City for a secret meeting with the American ambassador, who said He had a message from President Carter. My advisor, Robert Armau, planned to come with me to the capital, but Panamanian officials refused to let him attend. Had Ambler Moss served in the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, he would not have been surprised by the Shah's escapade. The court reeked of spiciness. I'm not saying the word to keep it clean. 3 letters. Everyone talked incessantly about who was the latest favorite of the Shah. The love life of his twin sister, Princess Ashraf, was subject to even more lurid gossip and speculation. And yes, this woman is a real treat, and I think we're going to have to do an entire show about her all on its own. Because as you're about to find out, movie of the week, I see your comment. Yes, you finished what I had begun. Okay. So more about Princess Ashraf. Throughout his exile, the Shah had no more passionate propagandist than Ashraf, a tiny, beautiful, fiery woman. She had always been one of the most powerful and controversial figures in the Pahlavi pageant, and it was she, with the help of Rockefeller and Kissinger, who intervened on the Shah's behalf again and again as he sought refuge during the 18 months he was a man without a country. In stories of contemporary dictatorships, there is usually a character whom the popular press likes to call the Dragon Lady. Almost always, she is the wife or a close relation of the dictator. In Vietnam, there was Madame Nhu, the sister-in-law of President Diem. In Haiti, Michelle Duvalier, wife of Baby Doc. In the Philippines, Imelda Marcos, the queen of footwear. In the land where the dragons originally had their lairs, there have been 2 dragon ladies, Madame Chiang Kai-shek and then Madame Mao Zedong. The original dragon lady first appeared in a 1930s comic strip called Terry and the Pirates. She was Asian, wore long slinky dresses, and was quite clearly evil. In the case of Iran, the dragon lady was Ashraf, who liked to consider herself far closer to the Shah than any of his wives. She was known in court circles as Saipa, Son Altesse Impériale la Princesse Ashraf, and the stories about her are legion, although often no doubt untrue or at least exaggerated. She was said to have enjoyed a remarkable series of amorous adventures. She was alleged to be connected with the illegal substance trade. She successfully sued Le Monde for printing a story to this effect, and the Washington Post retracted its version of the tale for lack of evidence. She was thought to have made scores of millions of dollars in her multifarious business deals. Apocryphal many of these stories may have been, but it surely says something of the bizarre, frantic, almost hysterical nature of Iranian society in the 70s that they were even alleged about her. Ashraf was feared, she was hated, she was admired, she was rarely ignored. In the formal portraits of the family before their fall, the men stand stiffly and, at least in the case of the Shah, tautly nervous in dark uniforms emblazoned like Christmas trees with miles of gold braid and garnishings of metals. And if you want an illustration of that, you can just look to the right hand of your screen and you can see the Shah wearing 2 military uniforms. And in the top most picture, you can see those golden epaulets that would do Michael Jackson proud. Continuing. The women are in long white gowns slashed by imperial sashes. It is the tiny princess who seems to tower above the rest, in gall, in fury, in chutzpah, in sexuality, and in spiciness, and in imperiousness. It was commonly said among Iranians that the genes of Ashraf and her brother had become mixed up, and that Ashraf should have been the boy twin and become ruler of Iran. Kind of like Princess Anne, I suppose, in the UK. Subsequently, she acknowledged that she was indeed both more stubborn and more robust than her brother. I always felt that I had to look after him and protect him. Even as a little girl, I never left his side. All the evidence suggests that she would have made a far more determined ruler than the Shah himself. And here is an illustration. Here's the Shah in the middle, and that's his wife, Farah, on the left. And I can't read the caption, but presumably that's the Crown Prince Reza, the young man walking on the right there. Okay, continuing. She was born a few hours after her brother, and it was he, the male heir, who gave the joy, as Ashraf soon came to recognize. To say that I was unwanted might be harsh, but not altogether far from the truth, she wrote on the first page of her autobiography. That's sad. I realized very early that I was an outsider, that I would have to create a place for myself. In later years, my critics would say I had overdone this somewhat, that my presence was everywhere. But as a child, I was scarcely noticed at all. She found her sense of family in an obsessive love for her twin. One of her lovers later wrote, with no exaggeration, that her brother was the light of her life, the apple of her eye, the blood that flowed in her veins. She loved him with a passion that was both possessive and unsharing. He was one half of the symbiotic whole of which the princess was the other. What would Jung have to say about this? When he was sent away to school in Switzerland, she said, she felt as if I had been separated from a part of myself. She believed that the two of them were like faces in a mirror. How symbolic. How very symbolic. Ashraf had a miserable first marriage. I was so intimately naive and so repelled by my husband that I had to take what we now call a tranquilizer before I could bring myself to share his bed. Oh, gosh. She divorced him and fell in love with someone else, but her brother thought him unsuitable and forbade the marriage. She was later grateful, she claims, because she came to realize that I could never embrace any future course at the cost of cutting myself off from my brother. At around this time, the end of the Second World War, her spicy, intimate life became a matter of much gossip. This, she insisted later, was because many Iranian men were outraged that she should broach their exclusive preserve of politics. They therefore spread stories about her. Her brother suggested she squelch the rumors by taking another husband. So she married an Egyptian friend, Ahmad Shafiq, but the stories continued. She became known as the Black Panther. After World War II, when the Soviets were refusing to leave the Iranian province of Azerbaijan, she visited Stalin, and, she says, greatly impressed him by the force of her arguments and style. Their scheduled 10-minute meeting lasted for 2.5 hours, and then Stalin invited her to a sports stadium with him. He called her a true patriot and told her to tell her brother that, if he had 10 like you, he would have no worries at all. Then the great dictator gave the beautiful little princess a magnificent sable coat. Such compliments emboldened her to intervene even more forcefully in politics. One U.S. Embassy report from 1951 noted, "Her motives have been improper and her actions often maladroit, but she has an instinct for decision which is badly needed in the Shah's close entourage. Her forceful character, her sharp insistence for action, can push her brother from passivity." As the Shah became more powerful and somewhat more self-confident throughout the 50s and 60s, he seemed disinclined to allow Ashraf political power at home. So her energies were channeled into a variety of other interests, such as the rights of women and the United Nations. The Shah sent her to China in 1970. It was a successful visit, and eventually Iran and China restored full diplomatic relations. When China won its seat at the United Nations in 1971, one of the first invitations its delegation accepted was to a glittering lunch with Ashraf at the house of the Iranian ambassador to the UN. Her China visit was followed by others to India, Pakistan, North Korea, and several African countries. By the mid-70s, Ashraf was leading the Iranian delegation to the UN for at least part of the General Assembly sessions. She accomplished these international missions with some distinction. Yet at the same time, at home, she was becoming the symbol of all that was most unattractive in the Pahlavi family. A CIA report of 1976 declared that the princess had a near legendary reputation for financial corruption and for successfully pursuing young men. Her relationships with these swains often ended amicably, and many of them went on to rise in government service. The CIA report described her business entanglements as often verging on, if not completely, illegal. Ashraf always vigorously denied any wrongdoing. In 1976, her car was ambushed by men armed with the kind of weapons that hurl projectiles. Those kind of men. Near her home in Juan-les-Pins in the south of France, it was raked with bullets. The driver managed to ram the attacker's car and rush Ashraf away, but a woman friend with her was unalived in the assault. No arrests were made, she said later. Some people said it was a mafia-type thing, connected with what they called my illegal substances traffic. I doubt experienced assassins would have bungled it. In September 1978, a few months before her brother fell from power, Ashraf returned to Tehran from a trip to the Soviet Union. The streets were clogged with demonstrators. She flew to her palace by helicopter and was appalled by the massive crowd she saw below. She was horrified particularly by the fact that the women had thrown away the emancipation the Pahlavis had granted them and were all wearing, this is her quote, the mournful black chador their grandmothers had worn. My God, I thought, is this how it ends? To me, it was like seeing a child you had nurtured suddenly sicken and die. To her dismay, her own brother no longer sought her advice. Indeed, he is said to have considered her presence in the country an embarrassment, and he asked her to leave again. She packed up her goods and chattels and fled westward. Now here's a lovely quote, if you can see on the screen in the large type. I have highlighted it. Oh, I see you in the chat. Movie of the week. She sounds fun. Yeah, she's an interesting character. I can't wait to do an episode on Princess Ashraf. Okay. She was girl bossing long before that was a term. Okay, Ashraf. Oh, I'll leave that quote up there for a little while longer. Ashraf was not unique. In the 1970s, Iran became a wonderland for businessmen and women. Kickbacks, bribes, agents' fees, secret understandings between princes and PR men, princesses and CIA agents, Samsonite briefcases packed with $100 bills, hand-carried on executive jets, companies with P.O. Box addresses in the Caribbean and Liechtenstein, secret orders and counter-orders conveyed in private meetings with the Shah. This was the stuff of which business was made. It had not always been so. During the 1960s, when the Shah's White Revolution was increasing literacy, improving the position of women, and alleviating rural poverty, there was a feeling of hope among the growing middle classes. And as a result of his reforms, the Shah enjoyed an excellent public image in the West. He was seen as an enlightened despot pursuing liberal policies. I can't. Oh, movie of the week again in the chat. I'm pretty sure that quote would double as rap lyrics. Could be. Probably has been, if not exactly in those words. Probably in other words. It is. Okay. Going back. Let me see. Let me find my place again. Okay, yes, enlightened despot pursuing liberal policies. And again, this is a 1988 article from Vanity Fair, an American publication, and it is definitely not going to be in any way, shape, or form unbiased in terms of politics or history, so we're all just going to have to take that into consideration. It is very factual, but it is also, as almost any publication is going to be, it is going to be somewhat biased. So Let's continue. Let's see, where did I leave off? But in the 70s, as the Shah's allies encouraged him to become the policeman of the Gulf, and as massive increases in oil revenues led him to concentrate on military and strategic concerns, Iran began to fall apart. Under the pressure of the oil boom, both corruption and repression grew. Many of the smooth, well-educated young men in designer suits making deals over coffee and cognac at the Royal Hilton were in fact agents of Savak, the Shah's secret police. They glided through the corridors of power and the universities, attempting to entice and to entrance others. These men did not bully or threaten. Well, the secret police did bully and threaten. They did a lot more than that. Maybe not maybe not in the corridors of power and universities, but certainly on their own territory. They weren't the good guys, that's for sure. These men did not bully or threaten. Instead, they sympathized with the frustration of their peers, but pointed out how very much was available, and how wise it would be to grab it. The system might not be perfect, but where in the world could perfection be found? And even if there was no political freedom in Tehran, were there not far more opportunities for advancement here than elsewhere in the Middle East? But as with all secret police forces, Savak's principal objective was to gather intelligence and to sow fear. There you go. Once a person fell into the clutches of Savak, there was nowhere to turn. Savak was empowered to act as the sole investigator of all alleged political crimes and also to bring charges. It could make people simply disappear. According to testimony of former prisoners, Savak's methods of torture included whipping and beating, electric shocks, pulling out nails and teeth, pumping boiling water into the backside, hanging heavy weights on a certain part of the male anatomy, the, shall we say, berries of the twig and berries euphemism, tying the prisoner to a bed frame that was slowly heated, inserting broken bottles into the backside, and the R crime. Savak was entirely its own master, answerable only to the Shah. Now, I guess I should just step in for a second and reiterate this article being published by Condé Nast in Vanity Fair. The United States government, as it's pretty obvious, I think, from both this article and the more recent articles, backed the Pahlavis. It looks like that's still occurring, and following their exile, the Empress, the Crown Prince, they have resided in the United States. So if a United States publication is willing to admit this, you know it's not only got to be that bad, but probably even worse, as though you could imagine anything worse than what I've just read. But again, the Savak was probably more than like the economic corruption and whatnot. I think that maybe, and I'm no expert at all in this subject, but from what I've heard and read, probably the biggest black mark, the most angering thing maybe to the population. That's my very, very shallow take on that. If anyone out there listening knows better, you can certainly leave a comment, educate me. I'm certainly willing to listen, but I see movie of the week in the chat. As such agencies usually are, if they're even accountable to the despot. Yes, well, it seems to be a running theme with secret agencies of all kind that, the secret part leads to, no oversight and a lot of bad acts. I'll just put it simply that way. So let's get back to the article. Savak was entirely its own master, answerable only to the Shah. So unfortunately for him, the buck would stop with him. And the dynasty stopped with him, at least thus far. By the mid-70s, fear of Savak extended even into the elite. Almost everyone with a higher education knew someone who had disappeared or whose death was thought, perhaps wrongly, to have been the work of Savak. And in this atmosphere of fear and hypocrisy, everyone was cashing in. The Shah's cronies got themselves appointed agents for different foreign corporations, insisting that without their services, nothing would be achieved. No contracts won. Indeed, some 5 or 6 super agents, together with 25 or 30 sub-agents, began literally to dictate the economic direction of the country. The Council of Ministers and the High Economic Council took due note of their wishes and commands. One of the key ministers, who later safely fled abroad with much of his wealth, devoted a great deal of time and effort to making sure that the various princes and princesses were getting everything they said they had to have. One of the Pahlavis openly stole and exported for his personal gain some of Iran's national art treasures. Oh, that's horrendous. In particular, gold artifacts unearthed at the prehistoric archaeological site at Marlik. In 1971, in 1974, and then again in 1978, when it was too late, the Shah made attempts to curb this sort of corruption. But he was always half-hearted. His underlying attitude was that if common Iranian businessmen were making mountains of money from his policies, there was no reason his family should not also profit from the benefits he was conferring on Iran. In any court, there are courts within the court. In Tehran, the satellite courts swirled jealously around the Shah's relations, who, through their birth, controlled so much patronage in the land. Each of the siblings had his or her own gallery of hangers-on and cronies, the men and women who fixed contracts and commissions on behalf of the princelings. I mean, honestly, though, isn't this the kind of thing that literally just goes on in any center of power, especially any government? I mean, any government in history, in anywhere around the world. That's what happens. Proximity and access gives people power to do things, and this is often how they do it, to greater and lesser degrees, to, more, sometimes more shady, sometimes less so, but it's always the way it goes. Okay, continuing. There was also a children's court, or children of courtiers. Some of them lived pretty wildly in the 70s. They used to bring large amounts of substances, particularly what we call here on French Dip Empire, marching powder, into Iran. Their parents' positions meant that they were never searched at customs. There was a Colombian dealer who many of them used. He came so often that they called him Concorde. It's not explained, but presumably because he was taking the Concorde jet, which is no longer flying, I believe. They retired that some years ago, the last flight of the Concorde, not talking about a television show. Movie of the week in the chat says, yes, but perhaps not so brazenly. Well, I don't know, movie of the week. I mean, look at our own country. Go at any point in time in our own country. Well, maybe not. I don't know. No, I've studied enough history that, yes, it's just constant. But brazenly, I don't know. Selling art treasures is pretty, national art treasures is pretty hideous. I can't imagine a someone connected to the White House, for example, looting, I don't know, the National Gallery or the Smithsonian, or just literally taking portraits and things out of the White House. I don't know. I think that would, I guess that goes a little bit above and beyond, but, it's just matters of degree, I suppose. Okay, let's go back. Concorde. Any child of the court could get him through the airport by simply threatening officials there. If you give me, guff, I'll give your name to X. And and pretty. That is an old photograph of Princess Ashraf, if I can read the teeny tiny type on that caption correctly. Okay, continuing. Court corruption was increased immeasurably by the fact that ambitious Iranians could achieve no political power. They could serve the Shah as his agents, no more. Such authority as they had as ministers, governors, university chancellors, all derived from him. It was not so much a gift as a loan, which they knew could at any time be recalled. But they could become rich. That was the alternative to becoming powerful. Moreover, wealth had to be displayed as competitively as possible. Never in a third world country have European and American dressmakers, luxury car manufacturers, executive jet salesmen, art brokers, wine merchants, furriers, jewelers done so well as in Tehran in the 70s. Oh, there's some foreshadowing. Pimping was a highly developed art form in Tehran. One young courtier now living in the Belgravia area of London recalls that you had to pimp to progress. Business and spicy intimate activity were inextricably intertwined. Several of the Shah's closest advisors found girls for him. They were procurers. The stories were legion. The Shah insisted on spicy, intimate activity with a minister's daughter in a helicopter while it hovered over Isfahan. He had a love child in France. One of his mistresses sent a bill for couture clothes to the embassy in Paris. He shamelessly embarrassed the queen by flaunting his infidelities. That's disrespectful. When they arrived together at Samoritz, she would go to their villa while he repaired to the Hotel Souvretta to have spicy, intimate contact with the latest procurement. Whenever the reception area was stuffed with Savak agents, it meant that the Shah was in bed in an upstairs suite. Everyone knew. Giulio Andreotti, the former Italian prime minister, has recalled that once, when the Shah arrived at the Venice Film Festival, he shocked the local prefect by asking for a woman for the night. The prefect replied, "That's a job for the chief of police." That almost sounds like a line from a comedy. Andreotti felt the Shah's request lacked noblesse oblige. Okay, that's one way of putting it. We're getting deep into the really spicy stuff now, and we're almost an hour in. So I'm going to take this moment to remind you that you are listening to Friendship Empire. I am the Empress, and I would love it if you could click the like button, go ahead and subscribe, leave a comment in the chat if you're joining us live, and leave a comment under the video if you are catching this on a replay. We are on a march toward monetization so that we can add memberships, super chats, super stickers, more functionality for the YouTube channel, our page, and more things available. We can do members only shows, for example, once we get to the point where we can offer membership. So I would be very grateful if you would do that. It would help us an awful lot. Now, back to the article and the spiciness. Of European girls, it was said that he preferred blondes with large mouths. Yeah. Lufthansa hostesses were favored at one time. But for many years, a lot of his girls came from the redoubtable Madame Claude, a woman who comes up time and time again in the stories that we have and will be presenting on future episodes of Friendship Empire. Who ran one of the, who ran one of the most successful and prestigious call girl networks in Paris. Many of her girls were amateurs. Well, I think you'd call them pros, wouldn't you? And some subsequently married extremely well. I've heard the rumors. One of Claude's girls, a tall, well-built blonde, Ange, not her real name, spent several months in Tehran in 1969. Appropriate. She flew there first class and was met at the airport by a young man from the court ministry. They drove to the Hilton in a Mercedes with smoked windows. She was given a suite next door to his. He was good-looking, and he tried to seduce her. But she had been warned that if she agreed, she would be on the next plane out. The Shah wanted his girls untouched by Iranian hands. She knew that all the hotel staff knew just why she was there. For 3 days, nothing happened, except that in between trying to bed her, the man from the ministry taught her to curtsy. This would be essential when she met His Majesty, he said. It would be lèse majesté if she failed to curtsy. It seems really odd that you're going to pay a woman to have spicy, intimate activity with you, but you're requiring her to curtsy to you. Well, I guess everybody has their... Well, not everybody. I guess people have their fetishes. A very odd choice of foreplay, but okay. She was driven to a villa in northern Tehran, where there were several guards and a conceited-looking flunky whom she took to be a grand chamberlain, but no Shah. She was shown into a room that had a table laden with food and a bottle of Chivas Regal. She was very nervous, and the Shah was very late. Over the next 2 or 3 hours, I drank Chivas. When he finally arrived, I was completely drunk. She stood up and tried to curtsy as she had been taught, and fell over. "Oh, merde," she said, and tried to pick herself up. The Shah laughed and simply shook her hand. "But I have to curtsy," said Ange, and so she did. The Shah laughed again. Claude had told her that the Shah liked to dance and to drink. She poured him a large glass of Chivas and another for herself. He turned on the stereo, and they did a tango. Then, drunkenly, she said, "Alors, baisons," which, I guess that's like, let's go to bed, let's get it on, but in a much cruder way of saying it in French, and dragged him upstairs past the guards. The Shah was laughing. It seems that that's pretty much all he does, laugh and tango. The guards were not. By the time the Shah left, he was very late for a meeting with the Queen at the airport. Ange heard later that there was a terrible scene. They got on so well together that the Shah insisted that the weekend be prolonged. For the next few months, Ange saw him twice a week. He was always very nice to me, kind, gentle, and generous. But he seemed to her to be an extraordinarily sad man. Other girls were sent... Well, paying for company is rather sad. You'd think you could get it for free. Other girls were sent to the Shah throughout the 70s. He appeared to need them principally for the relaxation and companionship they could provide, a release from the strains of government and the servility that he himself demanded from his court. It was said that he was not much interested in spicy, intimate activity. Like Ange, most of them found him sad. By February 1980, when the Shah made his foray into Panama City for a romantic assignation courtesy of Colonel Noriega, what a distinction, he had been in exile from Iran for over a year. He was also seriously ill with cancer. There was an almost surreal quality about the Shah's disease. In a sense, his reaction to it, the way in which it was treated, and its eventual impact on his own country, the United States, and his other allies, create a metaphor for his rule. It is a story of obsessive secrecy degenerating into macabre farce. Altogether, 8 teams of doctors looked after the Shah. They did not all perform brilliantly. The first Western doctors to become aware of the Shah's condition were Jean Bernard and Georges Flandrin, 2 French specialists in diseases of the blood who were called to Tehran in the spring of 1974. They were met at Mehrabad Airport by an Iranian doctor who told them that he was taking them to see one of his patients, Asadollah Alam, the Shah's court minister, who had cancer. Alam gave them a good lunch and then told them he wanted them to see the Shah. The Shah was with his Great Dane, presumably a dog, and his personal doctor, Abdul Karim Ayadi, a small man who had dyed hair and wore a military uniform. The Shah told the two doctors, in French, that he had felt a swelling under his left rib cage. He knew it was his spleen. Sometimes it swelled, and then it went down again, he said. He did not seem to be unduly concerned. The Frenchmen examined him and talked about his previous medical history. They learned that he had once had malaria and that, a few years before, he had had a nephritic crisis. I think that's kidneys? I think that refers to the kidneys. For several years, he had had allergic reactions to various foods. He could not eat fish, which meant no pearls of the Caspian for the Shah, which I assume they're referring to caviar. Although that's fish eggs, not fish, but I guess if you have an allergy, it counts. Then, 54 years old, he was generally in good health, complaining of a mild asthenia, which was probably a result of his tiring life. His appetite was good, his weight stable. He exercised every day. His wife later said that he had a fantastic body for a man of his age. His blood pressure and pulse rate were normal. He slept well, though he took continual small doses of Valium every day. That's not good. With some difficulty, the doctors aspirated a bit of bone marrow and took a blood sample, and Flandrin asked for a microscope. There was none at hand. Dr. Ayadi sent out for one. From then on, it never left the Shah's side. The Frenchmen told Dr. Ayadi that they thought the Shah had chronic lymphocytic leukemia. Naturally, Dr. Ayadi was concerned, and just as in many matters of state, when the Shah's advisors were reluctant to tell him the truth, Dr. Ayadi asked the French doctors not to mention the words cancer or leukemia to the Shah. So his doctors told the Shah that he had a blood complaint called Waldenstrom's disease. This was what Georges Pompidou, the late leader of France, suffered from, and is in fact a mild form of lymphoma or leukemia with a less frightening name. They said that no treatment was necessary now, and that they would wait to see the progress of the condition. Well, that sounds like a terrible idea, but I am not a doctor. I am merely an empress. Subsequently, Bernard and Flandrin were criticized for not having made a more complete examination on this first visit. But it was not possible. The Shah would not allow any intrusive examination or an X-ray, let alone surgery, for any of these would have been impossible to conceal from those around him, and he wanted no hint of any illness to be noised abroad. Now, he could sneak out to meet up with ladies, but there was no way to sort of surreptitiously go, pretend you're having maybe a meeting with a lady, and then just go and get an X-ray or two. That seems kind of hard to understand, but I don't know. I've never lived the life of a Shah. And the illustrations here, this is clearly the Shah looking very unhappy. And I cannot quite read the caption. I do wonder if these are his doctors, perhaps. Or maybe they're the politicians. I can't tell from here. Okay, continuing. The Shah had chosen French doctors for a particular reason. He had confidence in their discretion. His distrust of the British was such that he was sure that somehow they would profit from whatever illness he might have. And he thought that if he saw a top American specialist, there would be a memo on the desk of the Secretary of State or the Director of Central Intelligence within days. Well, I would imagine they would know that anyway, because there are spies everywhere. Probably within, I would assume, even in his own family. And Okay, continuing. If Washington knew he was ill, he could no longer expect the same unqualified American support he then enjoyed. Yes, why wouldn't he go to David Rockefeller or Henry Kissinger? If anybody could manage to pull something off and keep it quiet, I would imagine that a Rockefeller and Kissinger definitely could. But who knows? Okay. He would be deserted by his allies. The great civilization would crumble. When his cancer was finally revealed in 1979, American officials did indeed say that it had been known before. Had it been known before, American support for him would have been much less firm. And so it was that every 5 or 6 weeks, for the next 4 years, Dr. Flandrin secretly flew to Tehran from Paris to take care of the Shah. He made 35 such trips before the Shah left the country in January 1979. In Tehran, there were constant rumors that the Shah was ill, but that tends to happen in any society where the health of one man is so vital. Yes, has anyone checked on Putin recently? I heard he wasn't doing too well and seems to be still kicking. Unless it's one of those doubles or something. Who knows? In 1978, an American diplomat, John Stemple, was warned by his Soviet counterpart, with whom he regularly lunched at one of the city's better restaurants. Not exactly spy versus spy, is it? That the Shah had cancer. But the embassy dismissed this information with the comment, "This rumor has abounded in many quarters and may be of Soviet inspiration." Ah, well. Over the years, the circle of people known to be aware of the Shah's condition grew, but only slightly. In 1977, Flandrin and Bernard decided that it was time that the Queen was informed. Oh, well, that's nice of them. They were more frank with her than with her husband. They used the word cancer. It put her, she said later, in a terrible position. She now knew more about her husband's illness than he himself did. She decided that this was wrong and that he should be told more. I said, "We have to tell him for 2 reasons. On the human side, he is feeling well. It's not as if he were very sick. And he is not a child. He is strong and he can take it. There is also the political side. He's the king of a country. He has responsibilities. You can't just hide something like that from him." But even then, it seems, the fearful word cancer did not pass between the Shah and his doctors, nor between the Shah and his wife. As far as the Shah was concerned, he was still suffering from Waldenstrom's syndrome. But he understood it was more serious than he had first believed. For me, it was a really hard period because I didn't know whether he knew or not, the Queen said later. The doctors would talk to him, but without mentioning cancer. They would say sarcoma or lymphoma instead. Well, it's the same thing. More specific, but you're not going to have sarcoma or lymphoma without something, cancer-y. They did have dictionaries in Iran, I would assume. Okay. Denial is a thing, huh? In the evening, my husband would talk to me and mention some phrases. Then I would go to the doctors and ask, "What have you told him?" They said, "We have told him everything, but we haven't mentioned the word cancer." So all my answers accorded with what he was telling me. Sometimes I thought, maybe he knows and doesn't want me to know. For a long time, it was just this act. My husband said we mustn't tell anybody. Then again, the doctors would talk to me, and then he would say, "Why do you think they're giving me all these pills?" I would tell him, "Well, it's because your blood is not making platelets or something." So for a long period, it went like this, not mentioning it to each other. It was strange for me. I thought, how come I've mentioned Waldenstrom's to him, and he's not curious? Or lymphoma? It was inevitable that after the cancer was revealed publicly, many commentators would see it as explaining much about what went wrong with the Shah and Iran in the 70s. But if the Shah did not know that he was critically ill, his malady may not have had a crucial impact on his decisions. His disease would have caused tiredness, But chlorambucil, the mild anti-cancer drug that Flandrin and Bernard prescribed to treat the Shah, was easy to take and without side effects. At the end of April 1979, 4 months after the royal family had been forced by Islamic militants to flee Tehran, the Shah noticed a swollen gland or lymph node in his neck. Flandrin was alarmed. He flew to the Bahamas, where the Shah had been permitted to take refuge for a few weeks, and took a bone marrow sample. An examination of the tissue back in Paris showed very large abnormal lymphoid cells, and Flandrin started administering more intensive chemotherapy, although the Shah's continuing desire for secrecy didn't permit what the French doctor thought would be the properly aggressive treatment. Then in September, when the Shah was in Mexico, his health began visibly to deteriorate, and his American aides became worried. Robert Armau spoke to Joseph Reed in Rockefeller's office, and Reed called Dr. Ben, it's either Keen or Kane, I'll go with Keen, an expert in tropical diseases, and an old friend who had recently treated Armau for diarrhea. Ben Keen then had a fashionable private practice on Park Avenue and an office and lab at Cornell University Medical College, New York Hospital. He has written standard works on Mexican turista, but although parasitology is his principal concern, he has also worked as an internist with patients whose illnesses have covered the whole panorama of medical complaints. When Reed called, he said the problem had to do with Peter Smith. What? Not again, said Keen. No, said Reed. This is a different Peter Smith. Some years before, Keen had been called in as a consultant on the case of Marcus Wallenberg, a leading Swedish industrialist and cousin of the war hero Raoul Wallenberg, who had developed a rare lung infection. When Keen examined him, he was close to death, and Keen told his Swedish physicians, "This man cannot be treated according to the status of his real identity. He must be treated as an ordinary patient, as a Peter Smith, if he is to survive." In other words, he should not be privately coddled by nervous consultants hired for the occasion, but be given the best public medical team in the country. It was done as Keen advised, and Peter Smith lived. Now there was a new Peter Smith, said Reed. It was the Shah. He was in Mexico, and he was suffering from malaria and jaundice. Please, would Keen get down there? And here we have, this is the Empress on the left, and that should be Omar Torrijos, the Panamanian, the head of Panama at that time, when they were in Panama, when the Pahlavis were in Panama. And Torrijos was, as we learned, a bit of a naughty boy himself. Continuing, thus did Peter Smith become the first of many medical aliases in the coming months, or perhaps the second, if one includes the false name that Flandrin had for years applied to his blood samples in Paris. But Keen had made a significant, if paradoxical, point. The rich and powerful are not always able to obtain the best medical care. Their very importance denies it to them. Private facilities are often not so well equipped to deal with the most serious illnesses as are public teaching hospitals, and doctors are often more frightened of taking risks if their patient is someone of consequence. In the event, the Shah's condition would be aggravated by the fact that it proved impossible to treat him as a Peter Smith. He should have received the best of care. In fact, he got near the worst, Keen himself said later. By the time Keen arrived in Mexico, the Shah looked appalling. He was deeply jaundiced and had lost about 30 pounds. The chemotherapy was clearly not working anymore. The Shah's spleen was swollen, and so were the lymph nodes in his neck. He had some sort of obstruction, possibly gallstones, that needed to be removed. Flandrin agreed, but was dismayed that he, the oncologist or cancer specialist, was being replaced by an expert in tropical medicine He was not reassured to hear that Keane intended to take the Shah to New York Hospital. That was where Asadollah Alam, the Shah's court minister, who had entertained Dr. Bernard and Dr. Flandrin the first day they saw the Shah in 1974, had died. Flandrin and other French doctors had flown to New York with Alam. They had had a dreadful experience with the staff at New York Hospital. Now, Flandrin went over to the Queen to whisper, "It's a catastrophe, the worst thing that could happen." Dr. Flandrin wanted the Shah to be treated in Mexico, but he was overridden by the Shah's American advisors, who wanted him in New York. President Carter was persuaded, that U.S. President Jimmy Carter was persuaded by Dr. Keane that the Shah required treatment that could be administered only in the United States. And despite fears that the Shah's arrival in the U.S. would jeopardize the security of the American embassy in Tehran, Carter agreed to allow the Shah to come. On the night of October 22, 1979, the Shah was flown secretly into LaGuardia Airport. He was admitted into New York Hospital under a pseudonym, David Newsom, who was the senior State Department official liaising with his entourage. Mr. Newsom was not amused. At New York Hospital, the Shah's gallstones were removed and radiotherapy was administered to the swollen glands in his neck. His exact condition was unclear to the various doctors treating him. Dr. Flandrin, the one man who knew his medical history intimately, was now back in Paris. A key question was whether or not to take out his spleen, which was by this time 3 times its normal size. Oh, I'm sorry, Movie of the Week. I missed your chat. You said, they say that Lincoln would have otherwise survived if not for this. You mean Abraham Lincoln would have survived if not for poor medical treatment? Oh, I guess the doctors were too afraid to treat him aggressively, and therefore he did not make it as a result of that. I assume that's what you mean. That's a pretty horrible thought. Okay, continuing. Where was I? Okay, Flandrin back in Paris. The spleen. Okay, here we go. Dr. Morton Coleman, a cancer specialist, called in by Dr. Keane, wanted to remove the spleen in order to be able to determine the extent of the Shah's lymphoma, but the surgeon who removed the gallstones felt that the Shah was too weak to endure a more extensive operation. This was a crucial decision. Problems with his spleen eventually killed the Shah. Once more, the famous man syndrome seemed to be intruding. The whole world, or much of it, was interested in the Shah's condition, and so his doctors, perhaps inevitably, tilted toward caution. And here's a picture of the Shah, probably quite ill at that time. And Movie of the Week in the chat has followed up with, yeah, there was a junior doctor who wanted to do things the standard way, but the experienced doctors in the room overruled him. Ah, yes. I imagine that's the kind of thing that occurs all over, many times, not just with medical situations. Oh, well, they had to live with themselves and their decisions, didn't they? Poor the younger doctor. Okay, during the gallbladder operation, a lymph node was cut from the Shah's neck. Keane later said, it showed that he now had a large cell lymphoma, a more serious cancer than that which the French had originally been treating. The gallbladder operation itself was not entirely successful. One gallstone was left behind and had to be removed later by a semi-surgical procedure. Privately, some doctors were aghast at this. It should not have happened, said Flandrin. While the Shah's bile duct was still blocked, the aggressive chemotherapy that Dr. Coleman, the oncologist, had outlined could not be given. In any case, because of all the disagreements over treatment, Dr. Keane had asked Dr. Coleman to remove himself from further involvement. From Coleman's point of view, the Shah, who was suffering from cancer, was now without a cancer specialist. That is indeed appalling. On November 4, 1974, hundreds of militants swarmed over the walls of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and captured the 66 Americans inside. They demanded the return of the criminal Shah to Iran as the condition of their hostages' release. And so began one of the most prolonged and humiliating diplomatic debacles in which the United States has recently been involved. In Washington, it seemed that the Shah's departure from the country was essential to any resolution of the hostage crisis, and as soon as he was well enough to travel, it was arranged that he be secretly shipped out of New York. Sometime before dawn on December 2, Dr. Keene cut from the Shah's wrist the plastic name tag that called him David Newsom, and the Shah was wheeled out of his room and along the subdued corridors of the hospital. He was so surrounded by FBI men with weapons that it reminded him of a getaway scene in a 1930s gangster movie. They pushed him through the basement, past dirty gray-green walls, piles of broken furniture and machinery, trolleys of trash, into the garage, which was filled with agents. The getaway cars roared up the ramp into the dark of 71st Street. The Queen and the dogs were accorded a similar escort, which had been gathering in Beekman Place, where she was staying with Ashraf. The FBI was everywhere, she said, with their walkie-talkies, their bang-bangs, their unsmiling expressions, busily trying to look inconspicuous. For her, younger than her husband, it was like a James Bond movie. There were FBI and CIA people in my car, and there were laundry vans full of security people in front of us and behind us. The convoys drove through the dark, cold, and empty pre-dawn streets to LaGuardia. There, a plane, an Air Force DC-9, was surrounded by more men, wearing bulletproof vests and carrying machine bang-bangs. Sorry, trying to keep it safe for YouTube. They were bundled aboard and took off at once. The sky lightened as they flew southwest, and they landed at Lackland Air Force Base near San Antonio around breakfast time. Here again, security was intense. After saluting and shaking hands, the military men pushed them unceremoniously into an ambulance, which immediately sped off down the airfield with the Shah and the Queen hanging on grimly inside, swinging back and forth as the vehicle cornered and braked aggressively. Then came for the Queen one of the worst moments in the months of exile. The ambulance screeched to a halt, the doors were opened, and they were asked to step out. Suddenly they found themselves inside the psychiatric wing of a military hospital. There were men in white coats, male nurses who looked like gorillas, bars on the windows, and an overwhelming sense of oppression and finality. This was the safest place on the base, they were told. The Queen exploded, and the couple was eventually moved to the visiting officers' quarters. A prolonged search by the White House and State Department had turned up only Panama as a possible refuge for the Shah. No other country would take him, South Africa notwithstanding, but the Shah didn't want to go there because his father had died in exile in Johannesburg many years before, when he had been thrown out of Iran. We'll have to look at that on a future episode. On December 15, the Shah and the Queen took up residence in the holiday home of Gabriel Lewis, a former Panamanian ambassador to Washington, on the beautiful Pacific island of Contadora. When the Shah arrived in Panama, Omar Torrijos told his Surgeon General and personal doctor, Carlos Garcia Aguilera, that he wanted him in charge of the case. Charlie Garcia, as he is known, had something of a reputation in Panama City. A square, tough, dark-haired man, he loved the macho life of the military and charged around town in a curtained roadster with medicine and rifles and uniforms littering the back. Some of his colleagues speculated that he might have links to the CIA. Garcia went to Contadora to examine the Shah. He found his spleen enlarged, and he took a blood sample. As far as Charlie Garcia was concerned, he was now in charge of the case. This was Panama, and Torrijos had assigned him. It was a Panamanian, not an American show. A young oncologist, Adan Rios, was asked to take care of the Shah's cancer treatment, and at the beginning of February, Rios checked the Shah into Patia Medical Center for a discreet examination. No one, not even Dr. Keene, knew about it. The tests at Patia were done under yet another pseudonym for the Shah. The name used was Manuel Antonio Noriega. Very soon after that, the Shah developed a respiratory infection, probably as the result of a virus. His white cell count and platelet count fell dramatically. White cells are needed both to provide immunity against disease and to kill bacteria. Now the Shah simply did not have enough to do either. Platelets are essential for blood to clot. The Shah could bleed to death, even without an operation. It was clear to Rios and Garcia that there was a new crisis. They were alarmed. So was Dr. Keene when he was informed in New York. The Queen was also worried about her husband. She called Georges Flandrin in Paris and asked him to come at once. As soon as Flandrin examined the Shah, he realized that his condition was again very serious. The spleen had become enormous, and Flandrin confirmed that both the Shah's white cell count and his platelet count were dangerously low. He also began to get a whiff of the arcane and frightening extradition negotiations being conducted over and around the Shah. What he did not hear, and no one at the time knew, was that Charlie Garcia was convinced that the Iranians had been encouraging him to unalive the Shah. Torrijos had sent Garcia with one of the Panamanian delegations to Paris to negotiate the question of the Shah's extradition with Iranian representatives. According to Garcia, one of the Iranians asked him a series of questions about how best to unalive a person. Would you use curare, strychnine, things of that nature? Garcia said later that, though the questions were indirect, I knew exactly what he was trying to tell me. I knew he was only dealing with one person. The end of the story was that, if you unalive the dog, you get rid of the rabies. If the Shah disappears, the problem of the hostages disappears. Aha. And here we go, getting a little spicier. Not in the spicy, intimate form of spicy, but here we go. It seems that the forcible unaliving of the Shah was being proposed quite seriously at this time. In his book Crisis, Hamilton Jordan, Jimmy Carter's chief of staff, recounts a secret meeting he had in Paris on February 17, 1980, with an Iranian whose name he had promised not to divulge. Jordan asked him why Iran could not put aside its grievances against the Shah. The Iranian replied, "But Mr. Jordan, we cannot put aside the case of the Shah. That man is so evil. He has tortured and forcibly unalived so many of our people. He has stolen so much of our money. The Shah and Kissinger and Rockefeller made our country an instrument of U.S. foreign policy. The Shah is the reason for the hostages. You must understand that. Holding 53 Americans is a slight injustice compared to the killing and torturing of thousands and thousands of Iranians by the criminal Shah." Jordan decided it was futile to argue about the past and asked how the present crisis could be resolved. "It was easy," came the reply. "All you have to do is unalive the Shah." "You're kidding," said Jordan, shocked. Shocked? Why would you be shocked? A man of his position? Shocked? I wouldn't be. "I am very serious, Mr. Jordan," said the Iranian. "The Shah is in Panama now. I am not talking about anything dramatic. Perhaps the CIA can give him an injection or do something to make it look like a natural death. I'm only asking you to do to the Shah what the CIA did to thousands of innocent Iranians over the past 30 years. Jordan said he responded, "That's impossible. It's totally out of the question." Subsequently, Jordan's interlocutor was revealed to be Sadeh Ghotbzadeh. I'm not perfect, obviously, with Iranian or Persian name pronunciation, sorry. The Iranian foreign minister. Early in March, Ben Keane, who had been getting secondhand reports that the Shah was feeling unwell, flew into Panama. He looked around and decided that nothing was as it should be. Dr. Torrijos had taken charge. He was beginning to think about how he could regain control. I needed a new solution, Keane said later. He talked it over with Armau at dinner and came up with the idea of finding a medical superstar, a surgeon so big that no one would dare buck him. He fixed upon Dr. Michael DeBakey, who was the most distinguished heart surgeon in the world. Dr. Christian Barnard had perhaps been more famous. There was nothing wrong with the Shah's heart. It was DeBakey's name and fame that Keane coveted. Dr. DeBakey is to heart surgery as Muhammad Ali was to boxing, Frank Sinatra to crooning, and Lyndon Johnson to democratic politics. Let's keep in mind this article is from 1988, so these references are very, very dated, very old. DeBakey, a genius with a vast and sometimes uncomfortable ego. In his private conference room in the hospital he runs in Houston, the walls are covered with green suede and festooned with just a few of the trophies, citations, awards, and photographs of DeBakey with the good, the not-so-good, and the great, whom he has, on various occasions, treated or saved. He has operated on the ex-king of the Belgians, I guess that would be Leopold III, Guy Lombardo, wow, that's a very, very old reference, band leader, if I recall correctly. The Duke of Windsor, the one who abdicated, and if you recall. Joe Louis, another very old reference, a late boxer, and many, many more. Howard Hughes died en route to the hope of salvation in DeBakey's hospital. DeBakey has been at the Texas Medical Center in Houston since 1948. Wow, that would have been 40 years at the time of the writing of this article. When he took over the Department of Surgery at Baylor College of Medicine, a part of the center, he had certain ambitions. He wanted to be a great surgeon, and he wanted to construct a fabulous medical school and hospital. By the end of the 70s, the medical center had become, appropriately enough for Texas, one of the biggest and most advanced medical facilities in America. It had more than 4,000 beds, a plant worth more than $600 million, and an annual operating budget of $552 million. It had dozens of different institutions on its campus, and it took patients from all over the world. Houston was oil, and Houston was the medical center. Part of the center's worldwide reputation derived from the fact that it concentrated on the most sensational and expensive kinds of individual medical rescue operations. Such an emphasis obviously created huge baronies and reputations for the top doctors at the center. Indeed, as the center grew, in many ways it became the sum of the reputations of its most brilliant and successful practitioners. They were the stars, the prima donnas on the stage that the center provided. And of them all, none was so great a star as Michael DeBakey. He became a celebrity because he did more operations, particularly more spectacular operations, than any of the other doctors. He also did many of them in a bright halo of publicity. When he performed the first implant of an artificial left ventricle, there was a Life magazine photographer in the operating room. DeBakey gave a network interview as he left the operating theater. By March 1980, Michael DeBakey was 71, and he had a young wife and new baby. Ugh. Ick. He was a good-looking man who wore heavy horn-rimmed spectacles and walked with a slight stoop. He seemed a little like an avuncular but sprightly turtle, With a pleasant smile and a quiet bedside manner, he had fantastic energy, and his hair, which had once been graying, was deep black. Oh, the old soy sauce hair dye. That must have looked lovely next to the young wife and new baby. Ooh, a little creepy. 71? 71. 71. I think that's pushing it a little bit with the new baby, but okay. At Dr. Keen's request, Dr. Bakey was authorized to come to Panama to act as an observer and surgical consultant in the case of the Shah. He arrived in a private plane with an assistant, an anesthetist, a nurse, and several other American doctors. Usually, DeBakey is welcomed in foreign countries as one of the world's most senior medical statesmen. But the evening he and his team arrived in Panama, no one came to meet the plane. I had persuaded DeBakey that he would be welcome, as everywhere else in the world, Dr. Keen said later. Instead, the great surgeon and his troupe of American doctors had to find their own way to the Holiday Inn. How glamorous, how luxurious. Paitilla Hospital, where the Shah was waiting to have his spleen removed, is close to the Holiday Inn. Convenient. In the most modern part of Panama City. By the time the American contingent got there, it was crawling with young men carrying submachine bang-bangs. Everyone had to wear identity cards. Dr. Flandrin had been given one that called him Médico del Rey, Doctor of the Shah, or, King, but Shah. The Americans were supposed to have picked up their badges at the hotel, but they had not done so, and when the Panamanian guards refused them admission, they became outraged. Only by resorting to counter-threats was I able to straighten things out, said Keen later. Torrijos himself had to be called before they were allowed in. Keen said he heard that the general was drunk. Perhaps inevitably, some of the Americans saw the incident as further proof of a Panamanian conspiracy against the Shah. The Panamanians saw it as another example of American arrogance. They went to see our patient at our hospital to decide what to do without consulting us. Gaspar Garcia de Paredes, the senior surgeon at Paitilla, said later. While they were waiting for permission to get into the wing where the Shah was being guarded, Keen and DeBakey wandered around the rest of the hospital. Keen later claimed that they were able to walk into the surgical units, the transfusion area, and the intravenous supply rooms. No, that's bad. He said that this made a mockery of the security arrangements. Definitely. For it would have been simple for someone to slip something into the materials that were to be injected into the Shah. After DeBakey had examined his new patient, as the others were leaving the room, the Shah asked Flandrin to stay behind. Dr. Flandrin, he said, you are like the Swiss, a neutral between the belligerents. Can one have confidence in these arrangements? Do you think I should let myself be operated on here? Flandrin had thought that DeBakey was the wrong choice of surgeon, although he now found him very impressive, a man of finesse and subtlety, with great intellectual and medical qualities. But the tension between the Panamanians and the Americans was appalling. Certainly not. I have no confidence, he said. I agree with you, said the Shah, with resignation. After breakfast the next day, Keen and DeBakey crossed the road to Paitilla for a meeting in the hospital library with their Panamanian counterparts. It was an unhappy occasion. The meeting was chaired by Garcia de Paredes. Usually his manners are impeccable, but, he said later, he was angrier then than he had been in many years. When he studied under Ben Keen at Cornell in the 50s, he had admired him greatly. Now he felt that Dr. Keen was behaving abominably toward him and toward Panama. He said he had lost pounds that week trying to avoid the hordes of press, to ensure tight security at the hospital, and to calm other doctors at Paitilla who were furious that Americans had been allowed to come at all. There were also different and competing paranoias. Torrijos had emphasized to his doctors that on no account was the Shah to die in Panama. Yet there were so many people. Oh, it's much like Disney World or Disneyland. You can't die here. Yet there were so many people who wanted him dead. The Iranians, through intermediaries, had apparently offered massive rewards to any doctor who terminated him. Hit squads were said to be after him. There were even rumors in Panama that the CIA itself was out to unalive him in order to end the hostage crisis. Some of the Shah's entourage had real fears of an quote accident unquote on the operating table. Alternatively, while the Shah was under anesthetic, he might be carted off to the airport in a box and flown to Tehran to awake under the vengeful smile of the Ayatollah. Garcia de Paredes tried to appear calmer than he felt as he opened the library meeting, sitting across the room from the Americans. He began by telling Keene that he was not authorized to practice in Panama and that he could not participate in any way in the operation. He said that they were all furious about press leaks that had cast doubts on their competence and caused them security nightmares. That was why DeBakey had been invited only as observer and surgical consultant. Turning to DeBakey, whom he considered more innocent than Dr. Keene, Garcia de Paredes said, "We invited you here to work with us, and we will stick by that. You are welcome." But he went on to add a phrase that infuriated the Americans. He said to one of the most famous surgeons in the world, "You know, the American College of Surgeons frowns on itinerant surgeons. Itinerant surgeons are carpetbaggers. They are jobbing cutters, not that kind. Men who descend from big cities onto small rural towns, cut whomever the local doctor has lined up for them, and move on to the next town, their fees in their pockets. They do not provide either pre-operative or post-operative care. Any mistakes they make are left in the hands of the local doctor." This was not how Dr. DeBakey was usually seen. It was a grave insult, but DeBakey responded calmly and politely, saying, "Well, you know, I've just come here to help." Later that morning, the Panamanians asked to meet alone with DeBakey. They tried to be conciliatory and told him that they had no quarrel with him personally. Indeed, they had the highest regard for his reputation. They would be glad for him to be part of the team. Their quarrel was only with Dr. Keene. The upshot was that the Panamanian and American doctors agreed to postpone operating on the Shah. But in fact, the delay was an American ruse. DeBakey felt, as indeed did Flandrin, that, given what had happened, the Shah could no longer receive optimal care in Panama. None of the American doctors wanted to abandon the Shah. They wanted to get him out of Panama. Quite apart from the medical crisis of the last few days, there was uncertainty over Torrijos' intentions and the specter of extradition. The Shah had been in the hospital all weekend while this medical tempest raged around him. It cannot have been pleasant to have been told by his doctors that his cancer was getting worse and that a major operation was essential. To have agreed to it, despite fears of those around him that he might be forcibly unalived or kidnapped under the anesthetic, to spend a couple of days in the hospital while his doctors screamed at one another, and then to be told it was all off after all. Throughout the melodrama, Farah Diba had been spending a good deal of time on the telephone to Jean Sadat in Egypt. In one such call, and that would be the wife of the then Egyptian president or I can never remember if it's a president or a prime minister. I think president, or maybe it was prime minister of Egypt at the time, Anwar Sadat. This was so long ago, who, if I remember correctly, was forcibly unalived in rather a dramatic way. And I think that ended his term in office. But this is his wife. Jean Sadat in Egypt. In one such call during the middle acts, as the doctors were squabbling center stage, she said, "Jean, our situation is desperate. The Shah needed an operation at once, or he would die. But it just could not be done in Panama. I cannot trust anyone here. The Queen said that she had to get her husband out of the Panamanian hospital. She simply could not have confidence in what might happen. Panama would not allow American doctors to operate. Could the U.S. government not help? Asked Mrs. Sadat. The U.S. government, replied the Queen with bitterness. We have had enough of their help to last a lifetime. Well, hold your crown, lady, because it seems like you're going to be getting help from that government for some years and decades to come. Continuing, Mrs. Sadat wrote later that her immediate reaction was to insist that the Shah come to Egypt for his operation. If we give this man shelter, God will never leave us, I thought to myself. This was not a matter of politics. It was a matter of principles. She called her husband, and he assured her she had said the right thing, even if it made trouble in Egypt. It will please God, she recalled him saying. In Panama, Faradiba felt that increasingly strange pressures were being placed on them. The telephone was, for a time, cut off, and they were told it was because they had not paid the bill. Then Torrijos sent a message saying that, as she was a student of architecture, she could come with him to visit buildings on one of the other islands. She said she would wait until her husband was better and they could both come, to which the reply was that she should come alone. You know, that was weird, she said later, this low voice in the corner, and only me. I said, what do they have in mind? I go somewhere and they do whatever they want with my husband. Is that the idea? She was afraid that by pleading the cause of the hostages, the Americans might persuade the Shah to change his mind and stay in Panama. I didn't want my husband to change his mind. We had to leave for Egypt. On Saturday morning, March 22, Jimmy Carter called Anwar Sadat to tell him of his concern over the Shah's possible arrival. Sadat apparently replied, Jimmy, don't you worry about Egypt. You worry about your hostages. Sadat had offered to send his own plane, but it had not yet left Cairo. White House aides in Panama judged that if the Shah was leaving, the sooner he did so, the better. So it was suggested that the U.S. find a plane that could make a through flight. At least 2 charter companies were contacted. The contract finally went to Evergreen International Airlines, which had had CIA affiliations. Some American officials thought this connection was unwise. The final charge to the Shah was enormous, $250,000, and that was in 1979 money, 1980, where are we at? 79 or 80 at this point. So far more than the $250,000 that it was at that time. Continuing, I guess they had enough money to pay for it from all the looting that they did from the country. The Shah's plane left on Sunday, and on Monday morning in Panama, emissaries from Iran hastened to the foreign ministry to present extradition documents charging the Shah with crimes against his people. The Panamanian foreign minister scuttled out a back door of the building. It was difficult to locate anyone at all willing to deal with the matter. Eventually, the emissaries managed to present the papers formally to a junior official. The documents were filed away. In the circular file. Also that morning, Torrijos had one last order, which outraged the Queen when she heard of it later. He sent word to Contadora that this is disgusting. The sheets on the Queen's bed were not to be changed. I didn't sleep with her, but at least I'll sleep in her sheets, he told one of his friends. That's so incredibly creepy and lame and weird. And lame and creepy. Continuing. On March 26, Dr. DeBakey arrived in Cairo with a team of 6 people to perform the operation for which the Shah had been waiting since December. So yes, this must be 1980 now. Sadat had ordered the Egyptian doctors, which included his own son-in-law and personal physician, to allow DeBakey to do as he wished. By this time, the Shah's blood counts had deteriorated to what Debicki called a very serious condition. The operation lasted an hour and 20 minutes. The Queen, her children, and members of the Shah's entourage watched the surgery on a video monitor just outside the operating room. Oh gosh, how creepy, especially for the children. That's not something that's comfortable to watch for, I would say, most people. Strong stomachs, I guess, and nerves. Okay, Dr. Keene gave them a running commentary. When the spleen was brought out, it was seen to be grossly oversized, 10 times as big as a normal fist. Oof. According to Debicki, 20 times, according to Dr. Keene, who later described it as 1 foot long, literally the size of a football. I'm not exactly sure quite how big a normal spleen is supposed to be, but I wouldn't want a football in my belly, that's for sure. Splenectomy in a patient in the Shah's condition can be complicated. For example, the tail of the pancreas fits right into the spleen, and there is always a risk that it will be damaged when the spleen is removed. In the case of a swollen spleen that surrounds the pancreas, this can very easily happen. The pancreas then releases powerful enzymes that destroy the tissue around it. Fluid collects. When a patient is immunosuppressed, as the Shah was, this can lead to an abscess. Often a drain is placed in the abdomen to prevent this from occurring. That was not done when the Shah's spleen was removed. Dr. Debicki said later that it had not been necessary because there was no damage to the pancreas. The spleen and a sliver of liver, that's a icky term, it sounds like something from a twisted version of Dr. Seuss. A sliver of liver removed during the operation were taken to the pathology lab for examination. The Egyptians invited Dr. Keene to examine the tissues. As soon as they cut the liver, Dr. Keene looked at the Egyptian pathologist. A healthy liver would have been dark red. The Shah's was mottled white, invaded with cancer. At that moment, Keene said later, he knew that the Shah would die soon. He and Debicki were not in full agreement on the Shah's prognosis. As far as Debicki was concerned, the important thing was that the Shah's bone marrow was normal. He said in an interview that the future was difficult at this time to assess, but that he was hopeful that the Shah could resume chemotherapy, to which he had responded well in the past. In another interview, soon after the operation, he said the Shah was making a beautiful recovery. Dr. Keene did not share such optimism. The liver was so far gone that he thought chemotherapy had no chance. The morning after the operation, he told the Queen and Princess Ashraf that they should cut back on the chemotherapy and let the Shah spend his remaining months in as much comfort as possible. He told them that the Shah might live to see another Christmas, not the most obvious landmark for Muslims, but he felt that the Shah should be allowed to die in peace and that there should not be too much officious striving to keep him alive. Then, Keene said in a later interview, I paid final respects to my patient, sparing him the bad news, and left. He turned the Shah's care over to the Egyptians with Dr. Flandrin, in whom the Queen still had confidence, acting as consultant. In an interview given later, Debicki took a position closer to that of Keene and far from his own original qualified optimism. He said the biopsy showed the liver to be full of lymphatic cells that were malignant. We had no idea before there was that much malignancy. That was really quite shocking. Should it have been, though? I mean, they should have known. They should have at least guessed, I would imagine. The hostile reaction throughout the Middle East to the Shah's arrival in Egypt, which Jimmy Carter had feared, began at once. Ayatollah Khomeini declared, Satan is now attempting a new political project to perpetuate his domination. Satan must know that to support the Shah is to support his great betrayal and his pillage, and to have sent the Shah, enemy of Islam and Iran, to another enemy is to deceive the Muslims of the whole world. Sadat privately scoffed at such abuse. The Ayatollah was a lunatic, he said. He went on television to explain himself publicly and said that it was against Islamic law to pursue a sick and homeless man. The Egyptian People's Assembly overwhelmingly approved his decision to admit the Shah, but Muslim fundamentalists throughout Egypt protested and demonstrated. The tensions and the violence grew worse. 10 days after the surgery, chemotherapy was begun again. Then the Shah left the hospital and was driven to the Kubbe Palace, which is usually home to heads of state visiting Egypt. He and the Queen lived there in somewhat faded but very pleasant surroundings. For a few days he seemed to be recovering, but then he began to complain of pains in his stomach, nausea, and vomiting. He developed a fever. X-rays showed fluid building up around the diaphragm, above the diaphragm. An infection was discovered. Now, more serious arguments set in among his relations. In particular, the long-standing tensions between Princess Ashraf and the Queen developed into disagreements as to how he should be treated and by whom. Ashraf in particular was unwilling to accept Dr. Keen's recommendation that her brother be allowed to die. Consulted by telephone in Paris, Georges Flandrin said he thought it sounded as if the Shah had developed a subphrenic abscess. He recommended that Debeki be recalled from Texas. Princess Ashraf was not content. She summoned Dr. Morton Coleman, the oncologist who had originally seen the Shah when he arrived at New York Hospital. By this time, the Shah had had at least 8 separate teams of doctors. His original Iranian physicians, the French, the Mexicans, Keen's team, the American doctors at Lackland, the Panamanians, the Keen-Debeki team in Cairo, and now, finally, revolving sets of different doctors, all with different ideas of how he should be treated and might or might not be saved. When Coleman arrived in Cairo, he found the Shah had a fever and pain in his abdomen. He too thought the problem might be a subphrenic abscess. The Egyptians told me that the pancreas had been involved in the splenectomy and that they felt a drain should probably have been put in. Coleman called Debeki and said that he also thought the surgeon should return. At the end of April, Debeki flew back to Cairo and saw the Shah once more. According to a physician in the Iranian entourage, the Shah was fully dressed and very brave, very dignified, very erect, standing up straight and tall, I assume. He was feeling a little better than he had a week before, and he told Debeki he had no pain. Debeki examined him and said later that he found no distension, abdominal tenderness, or rigidity. I found no evidence of a subphrenic infection or abscess or pancreatic cyst, and all the other physicians in attendance agreed with me that there was none. My publications on subphrenic infections and abscess are considered classics in this field. Okay, that is a classic deflection technique. He claims he found no evidence of anything, which is fine, but then he follows it up with, but I wrote about this stuff and they're classics. Well, that don't mean nothing, buddy. It literally means nothing, and it is a technique that people use. It's like the invoking authority or something like that. I forget. I think there's a term for it, but you basically say something along the lines of perhaps, I'm well respected in this community, and everyone knows I'm a good person. And it's like, oh, so that means you can't make a mistake or have done something wrong? No. Nope, that actually is an indication that he feels some kind of guilt. He's trying to deflect by invoking his authority. Okay, continuing. He thought that the Shah had reacted badly to the chemotherapy. He and the Egyptian doctors decided that the treatment should continue, but with a reduced dosage for the time being. This was the last time Debeki saw the Shah. And movie of the week in the chat says, yes, I think that's appeal to authority. Yes, I think that's the correct term for that. Thank you, movie of the week. And it looks like we're coming up on 2 hours of streaming, and we are reaching the conclusion of this article, but I'd just like to take a moment to remind you that this is French Dip Empire. I am the Empress, and I would be so grateful if you would click the like button, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, leave a comment in the chat or under the video if you are catching this on the replay. And we would love to grow the channel to be able to offer memberships. Then we would be able to do members-only shows. We could offer super chats and super stickers and more fun things. So any little bit helps, and we would be much anything you contribute, a comment or a click would be much appreciated. Now back to the article. Let's see, where did I leave off? Okay, the last time DeBakey saw the Shah. Once again, there was no consensus among the doctors. Georges Flandrin in Paris and Morton Coleman still thought the Shah was suffering from a subphrenic abscess that should be drained. Dr. DeBakey had found no evidence of this. Yes, DeBakey found no evidence that he had done anything wrong. Imagine that. Keene in New York, because it was he, correct? In New York, felt that chemotherapy should be shelved. The oncologist Flandrin and Coleman believed that after a pause, it should continue. Indeed, Coleman thought that aggressive chemotherapy, which he practiced, could save the Shah. I really wanted to have a crack at curing this guy, he said later, and aggressive chemotherapy was the only way. When the only tool you have is a hammer. He said that Keene's pessimism reflected the old misguided conception of what cancer is all about. What? He recommended the addition of 2 further drugs when the treatment was resumed in May. Flandrin's prescription was milder. In the event, there was confusion about the dosages at the hospital. Neither was administered correctly. I'm just shaking. If you've ever seen The Addams Family, the old TV show, Lurch, I'm shaking my head, and if my voice were only deep enough. Oh, good Lord. The Queen found this all very upsetting. I imagine that's putting it mildly. I would be incandescent myself, but anyway. DeBakey had assured her in April that there was no abscess, but subsequently the Shah became much more ill. He couldn't eat anymore, and they couldn't find any more veins. They had used all of them on his hand, his arm, his leg. He was so sick we had to take him back to the hospital. I couldn't find DeBakey. At the end of June, I asked Flandrin to come. The Queen couldn't find DeBakey. All of a sudden, he's ghosting her, sending her straight to voicemail, so to speak. Awful. Awful situation to be in. On a human level, I suppose on the political level and historical, maybe I'm not supposed to have sympathy, but on a human level, I can't help it. This is a terrible story. Flandrin was on holiday in the Loire. I felt bad about it all, he said later. I had looked after him for so long. When the Queen's summons reached him, he hurriedly tried to assemble a French medical team. It was not easy because the summer holidays were approaching. He had to rely on people he did not know. Well, gee, I would think someone would jump at the chance to be part of history like that. But I guess the French doctors prefer their summer vacations. Flandrin was convinced that an operation to drain the abdomen was urgently required. He called Paris in search of a surgeon, and eventually he selected Dr. Pierre-Louis Fagnier, a spécialiste de second main. This is a surgeon who, in effect, attempts to deal with post-operative complications. He brought a team to Cairo. They told the Shah that he needed another operation. The Queen was in agony as to what to do, but decided that the French must operate. On June 30, Pierre-Louis Fagnier opened the Shah's abdomen and drained it. 1.5 liters of... Ew. pus was removed, together with pancreatic debris. I'm not even entirely sure what pancreatic debris would be. Parts of the organ itself, things that come out of the bile. What would that be? It's terrible. You shouldn't have that in your body. That's all I know for sure. Flandrin felt vindicated, but outraged. He considered the debilitating infection and weakness the Shah had suffered for the last 3 months could have been avoided altogether. He thought that after the spleen had been removed, a drain should have been left in the wound so that it could have been washed daily. He left the operating theater and told the Queen the news. Relations among the doctors deteriorated further. Ashraf wanted new opinions. Robert Armau began to assemble a medical team in New York. Dr. Keene started to plan his return. But then he had a call from Armau saying that there had been a palace revolution, and he was not now wanted. The Egyptians, like the Panamanians before them, became angered that responsibility for the patient was being removed from them. They were senior physicians, but were being treated like medical students. All the doctors held a meeting. Nobody wanted to take a decision, said the Queen. Always at a critical moment, it had to be a member of the family who decides. President Sadat was asked to intervene. He apparently told the Egyptians that, since it was now clear that the Shah was going to die, they should stand back. Flandrin said that Sadat had confirmed that he, Flandrin, was in charge. In early July, the disagreements began to surface. In the Egyptian press, the leading Egyptian paper, Al-Ahram, reported that during the operation to remove the Shah's spleen, the pancreas was injured. In the search for something to attach the surgical knot to when the operation was over, a surgical instrument accidentally hit the tail of the pancreas and created a cyst. The area became infected because the anti-cancer drug treatment the Shah had been receiving reduced his body's white blood cell count, hampering its ability to combat infection. Such reports, which were picked up by the American media, were labeled inaccurate by Dr. DeBakey in Houston. Well, of course they were. The Shah's condition was now improving, he said in an interview on July 8, 1980. He had been in frequent telephone contact with Cairo. Oh, but he ghosted the Queen, huh? Yes, yikes, indeed, movie of the week in the chat. I assume you're reacting to the dinging of the pancreas during surgery, which, yes, is quite horrifying. Okay. He had been in frequent telephone contact with Cairo. Dr. DeBakey claimed he had been. And I never got the impression in discussions that he is dying. This guy. He denied that the pancreas had been damaged by accident during the splenectomy. There was no way a surgical instrument could have accidentally pressed the end of the pancreas. We dissected the exposed tip of the tail of the pancreas and sewed over the area. Everything was clean and sterile. He said that when he visited the Shah at the end of April, there was absolutely no sign of any infection from the operation. He blamed the Shah's problems on too much chemotherapy, which had lowered his resistance to infection. Obviously the chemo did, but later, in responding to queries, Dr. DeBakey said, the Egyptian physicians were as astounded to see the Al-Ahram report as we were, and they assured us that no one at the hospital gave that information, since it was not true. The American surgeon assisting him during the operation on the Shah essentially confirmed Dr. DeBakey's view that correct procedure had been followed. And again, what else would he say? He's not going to throw DeBakey and himself under the bus. Not in this massive international kerfuffle. However, Dr. Flandrin said that he too was convinced that the Shah had been suffering from a subphrenic abscess. When Dr. Pierre-Louis Fagnier operated at the end of June, he found a necrosis of the tail of the pancreas. This could only be due to traumatic lesion of the tail of the pancreas during the splenectomy. I don't want to call it a mistake, but rather a problem which can happen to any surgeon. In other words, a mistake. While there is no evidence that a surgical instrument accidentally hit the pancreas, an infection could have developed from the clamps that came into contact with the pancreas in the normal course of the operation. The Shah's condition deteriorated throughout July. He had to have several operations to try to stanch internal bleeding. He was fully conscious and was, not during the surgery, not during several surgeries. I assume they mean just like afterwards. He was fully conscious and was occasionally able to sit in a chair. But for most of the time, he was laid out on a hard stretcher bed. He could scarcely eat. The Shah's children were now in Egypt, but spent a good deal of time in Alexandria rather than at his bedside. The Queen and an American advisor were in daily attendance. Ashraf was behaving very emotionally, Georges Flandrin remembers. Now, at the end, Flandrin was quietly ministering to the Shah, as he had for most of the last 6 years. The Shah was losing blood, and he was in agony. Those around him then say that he was very patient. He just talked about his country. I admired him a lot then, Flandrin recalls. During all this period, said the Queen later, everyone was complaining, and my husband never complained, never said anything against anybody. Sometimes he would say, I don't understand why, but being angry, insulting people, never. In a way, he had elevated himself so much above everything. I think he was a man of integrity, dignity. He was a civilized human being. Savak? And when you have suffered so much, seen so much, what is there to say? Words cannot express your feelings. When Mrs. Sadat visited the Shah just before his death, she too was struck by his stoicism. The Shah's end was brutal. On July 26, his temperature soared as his body was invaded by a new infection. He began to hemorrhage badly and went into shock. It was clear that he was near death. Flandrin told the Queen and Princess Ashraf. The Queen, in great distress, begged him to call the children back from Alexandria. Throughout the night, Flandrin monitored the Shah's blood pressure and other vital functions. But after transfusing 11 packed units of blood, he decided further fight was useless and stopped what he called obstinate therapy. Princess Ashraf later gave her own account of her brother's death. My spirit was completely confused, she remembered, but one thought dominated all others. I must leave with him. All I wanted was to end our life as we had begun it. Together. Like a robot, I went to my room and swallowed a mixture of sleeping pills and Valium. I lay down as if to go to sleep, but sleep did not come. After lying there, thinking of all her brother's qualities, she decided she must go back to his side. It was 5 a.m. He was still alive and breathing very fast. Suddenly, the machine stopped. Like a sleepwalker, drunk with remorse, I took him in my arms and did what I had never dared to do while he was alive. We're getting a little weird here now. Hold on, ladies and gentlemen. Never dared do? Continuing. I kissed him as much as I wanted, all over. His feet, his hands. Then I lost consciousness. I was carried to the palace, and when I woke up, I took 10 more pills thinking, this time it will work. But nothing happened, and I finally had to accept that when God does not want you, he does not take you. This chick is a little intense. Yikes. Others who were there that night have other memories. An Iranian aide remembers Ashraf sitting on a chair by the bed, staring at her twin's face. She was clearly traumatized by the loss of the love of her life. The Queen and the children came to the bedside at various times during the night. Other members of his entourage in exile were also there, including his valet, Amir Porshoja, who had served him for 25 years. He had a weak heart and was in a state of total grief about his master. Before the Shah lost consciousness, an aide said to him, "You are in shock. You will get better." The Shah replied, "No, you don't understand. I'm dying." Before dawn, he went into a coma. He died around 10 o'clock in the morning of July 27, 1980. At the moment of death, Amir Porshoja leaned his head against the wall and began to wail uncontrollably. The doctors removed the drips from the Shah's body. The Queen had the Shah's ring taken from his finger and given to her. She also took a small copy of the Quran from under the pillow. An Egyptian nurse closed his eyes. The Queen and his son Reza, that's the Crown Prince, kissed him on the cheek. His body was taken to the morgue. Someone snatched a photograph and sold it to Paris Match, the magazine. And yes, we are coming, as you can tell, to the very end of the article. After the death of the Shah, Farah Diba and her children stayed in the Kubeh Palace in Cairo until early 1982. Reza, the new Shah, well, kind of, then moved to Morocco, partly in order to stress that he was independent of his mother. In 1984, when he was 23 years old, he moved to the United States and took up residence outside Washington. Ostensibly, he devoted his time to attempting to restore the monarchy, but he did not have much visible success. In 1986, it was reported that, like his father before him, he was receiving the support of the CIA. And just for a moment, I would like to click back to the article that we began the broadcast with from June 2025 about the Crown Prince. And here we are decades later. Okay, back to the 1988 Vanity Fair article. The Queen and her three younger children, Farah Naz, Ali Reza, and Layla, so that's 2 daughters and a son, moved to the United States in 1982, and the children completed their education. Later, the Queen divided her time between Connecticut and Europe. Princess Ashraf continued to live either in New York or Paris. Throughout, she dressed in mourning for her brother, eschewing society, saying, "Why pretend to gaiety when your heart is bleeding?" She lived a lonely life, spending much of the day in bed, often rising only in the afternoon for a massage. She lives like a veal. In her evenings, she sometimes went to the movies with members of her entourage. Okay, I take it back. As in the old days of the palace, films were a passion. After the movies came dinner and the indulgence of another Pahlavi enthusiasm, card playing until the small hours when she finally tried to sleep. General Omar Torrijos, who, when he was harboring the Shah, had romantically speculated that his guest should take a helicopter or a beautiful white horse and ride into Persia and die like a king on a sword. And, of course, Persia being the ancient name for Iran. So Torrijos was killed in August 1981 when his plane crashed into a mountain in bad weather, and that has been a cause of controversy and conspiracy. If you want to look into that one, who might have been behind that, there are speculations. Continuing, Torrijos was succeeded as de facto ruler of Panama by Manuel Antonio Noriega. In 1987, a senior officer of the National Guard asserted that Noriega had sabotaged Torrijos' plane. There are other speculations related to that too. You could probably figure out who may have had the finger pointed at them, one of which a 3-letter agency that has been mentioned repeatedly in this article. And we've mentioned 2 of them, so take your pick, but it's probably the one you're thinking of. And in Iran itself, Ayatollah Khomeini consolidated a theocratic state that was in many ways more authoritarian and arbitrary than that of the Shah. All opposition was destroyed. According to Amnesty International, which had been critical of Savak under the Shah, thousands of political prisoners have been detained in Khomeini's Iran. Torture is commonly inflicted. There is no right to a fair trial, and death is a penalty all too often imposed. Amnesty reported that the Iranian authorities have announced, get this, the introduction of a new machine, an electric guillotine, to amputate the fingers or hands of convicted thieves. The official press claimed that it could sever a hand in less than 1/10 of a second. Wow. Progress. That's lunacy. Okay, since September 1980, 2 months after the Shah's death, Iran has been engaged in a bloody war with the Iraqis, traditional enemies of Iran with whom the Shah had come to terms. The war has been characterized by the dispatch of thousands upon thousands of young boys to instant, quote, martyrdom, unquote, and it is estimated that at least 300,000 Iranians and 100,000 Iraqis have been killed on the battlefield. This spring, hundreds of civilians in Tehran and other cities were killed and wounded during missile attacks. Under the Shah, no Iranians were at war, save those who fought in the short campaign to destroy the Marxist rebellion in Oman. And thus concludes the article. And it seems as though the best thing that they could say about the Shah is that things weren't quite as bad. They were really, really, really horrible and bad, but with violence and oppression. But, this just took it up a bit of a notch. Well, this was 1988, and as you probably know, it's not like things calmed down in that region. But that leads us to, as I said just a little while ago, where are we now? Where are we now with the Pahlavi dynasty? And I ask you, dear watcher/listener, what do you think? Do you think that the dynasty, the Pahlavi dynasty, will be restored at any point or any point soon? Any day now? Is that possible? Do you think they could return to Iran? Do you think Iran wants a monarchy again? Do you think it will matter if the people want it or not, or whatever regime? It seems like in many places, many countries, not the French dip empire, of course, but in many places, the people, their say is maybe not so necessary to the installation of a leader. But I guess we will see in the future what happens with the now very dusty, hopefully slip-covered, or actually I think it's being displayed in a museum right now, the Peacock throne, which you can see on the lower right-hand corner of your screen right now. And this is the end of part 1, the first episode in a new series that we are starting on the scandals of the Iranian Imperial Family. And as you could kind of glean little bits and pieces from the Vanity Fair article we just read, we are going to be looking more at the Shah's family. There have been some tragic deaths, not just the Shah himself, in his family. We're going to look to the past. We're going to look to what in 1988 would have been the future that had not yet happened. We'll examine Princess Ashraf. She was a hot mess, and we'll look more in depth at her. And also, we will be continuing with our other series and some standalone episodes in the future. So we hope that you come back for that. And if you've made it this far, I thank you for joining us. This is French Dip Empire. I'm the Empress. On your way out, I would love it if you could hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. And feel free to leave a comment under the chat. Every little bit helps the channel grow, and we hope to get to the point where we can offer memberships, special members-only episodes, super chats, super stickers, and so much more. So again, thank you for joining me. I appreciate it. I have certainly enjoyed presenting this show to you, and hope to see you next time. Have a great day. Bye-bye.